Okay, and the transcript. All right. So, welcome everybody. And Chelsea, could you go to the next slide, please? Welcome to the Volunteer Tutor and Classroom Aide webinar series. This is held the second Tuesday of every month at 9:30 a.m. And as usual, we have an expert in the field today, Chelsea DeLeo, and we'll be sharing the recordings in the PD portal, and there's also a YouTube channel that you can find. I'll post the link to that shortly. And Chelsea, can you go to the next slide? There is a survey, and I'm going to share the link to that shortly as well, because multitasking is hard. But next month we will have a webinar on cross-cultural tutoring. So this is not just ESL, but ESL and ABE, and ways in which tutoring can be cross-cultural, with members of the PA Adult Education Equity Committee, who are Maribel Ojeda and Caroline Mitchell. So that will be on Tuesday, February 14 at 9:30 a.m. A great way to start your Valentine's Day. So Chelsea, go ahead and get started, and I will put those links in the chat.
Thanks, Rachel. Sorry, I tried to copy them over, but for some reason, I also can't multitask.
Yeah, PowerPoint makes that really harder than it should be.
Yeah, for sure. But thanks, Rachel. Hi, everybody. My name's Chelsea DeLeo. I'm the manager for the Professional Learning Opportunities Project for Pennsylvania. I began my career as a volunteer tutor. I wanted to just mention that, and I loved being a tutor. I actually just started tutoring again because I missed it so much. And today we're going to talk about contextualized teaching and learning. And if you don't know what contextualized teaching and learning is, no worries. We're going to go through it together. I really appreciate everybody introducing themselves in the chat. If you want to keep that going, I love it. I love to see, where you're from, who you're working with, that kind of thing. It's really helpful for us going forward as we continue to plan these. So here's the objectives that we're going to focus on today. So again, we're going to define contextualized teaching and learning. We will identify skills and content appropriate for various learners. And then together, we're going to kind of work together to brainstorm ideas for activities that integrate the skills and the content. Before we get into the bulk of this, we're going to try to do this poll. Has anyone, if you've used Mentimeter before, great. If not, you can if you have a smartphone, you just open your camera app and you aim it at the screen here. It's going to take you to the link that's on Mentimeter. It's going to ask you a question, and I want you to type in your answer to the question. If you don't have a smartphone, no worries. You can just go to menti.com in your search bar in Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, whatever you use. And you'll just type in the code 67534497. Or you could use this very long link that I feel is just way too long for anything. And like we just said, it's really hard to copy and paste things in the chat when you're on PowerPoint. So if you need the link, let us know. Otherwise, try the QR code with your smartphone or go to menti.com and type in this code. If you're having any issues with this, you could unmute yourselves, let us know, or you could type in the chat. I'm going to pull up the screen in just a few seconds here. I want to give everyone the opportunity to do this, use this QR code first. Okay. Rachel, can you see the Mentimeter now? Okay, thank you. So as you can see, this is actually a really cool resource. Mentimeter is free and it allows you to do this polling. And it basically gauges what everyone's saying. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but it's a really great tool to use. And if you're interested in it, feel free to reach out to me and I could kind of walk you through it. So the question that I asked you is, when creating activities for your learners, what things do you consider? And the first thing that I saw pop up was level, and it was huge and blue. So it means that, a lot of folks were saying level, the level of the learners. I'm also seeing relevance, which is super relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. We have goals, also very relevant, background, super relevant. I'm loving these answers. Interesting, engaging, native language. I like that as well. Okay. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. I appreciate everybody sharing that. And that kind of gives me a good idea around it. Gives me some background knowledge about what you all use to plan your lessons. So it's going to help me as I'm presenting today. So another question, you could type this in the chat. You could unmute yourselves. I love to hear from you all. What do you, if you know, or if you have an idea, what is contextualized teaching and learning? I won't use too much wait time, but if you want to type it in the chat, feel free to do so. Take a guess, there's really no judgment here. So Christine asked CTL. So CTL is an abbreviation of contextualized teaching and learning. Good question. Lisa says CTL is starting from where the students are and moving from there. Very nice, Lisa. Thank you for answering that. Anyone else? Connecting new knowledge to existing knowledge frameworks. Yes. Okay. So based on this information that you're getting, so it's, exactly, Christina, planning an activity where students can build their knowledge because of the information centers around one topic. I like that explanation as well. So, starting where the learners are and then building from there, how does that benefit our learners?
This is Christina.
Hi, Christina.
I feel with these types of activities that it gives them a kind of centralized place to focus when they're learning, so that it's not like you're using words or ideas from a bunch of different topics. It's one, they can build the idea inside their head. They know what it is. And it's, I think, easier for them to kind of build associations and kind of build out from that than giving I'm sorry, I haven't had enough coffee.
That's
like,
okay. It's
it's
very
like
early.
giving activities where they're using like vocabulary from a bunch of different fields or
Sure.
terms. So
Yes, centralized. I heard that word centralized, and I think that's really important. So you're centralizing these ideas. And something that we mentioned earlier in that word cloud is relevance. We're making sure that the topic that the lesson or the activity is focusing on is relevant to the learners. So yes, that was very good. Thank you for sharing that. Sorry, PowerPoint has a mind of its own today. So as you explain, many of you explained to me, contextualized teaching and learning links the learning of foundational skills with academic or occupational content by focusing teaching and learning on a specific context. So just like Christina said, a specific context that is of interest to the student. For example, you might have a learner who's interested in becoming a nurse. Contextualized teaching allows us as the teachers or the instructors to link basic literacy, numeracy, and transferable skills with the specific content a nurse would need to excel in their career in our lesson plans. And this makes our teaching more relatable and valuable for our learners. So here are some examples about how contextualized teaching and learning, or CTL, can benefit our learners. So it enhances interest in long-term goals. It makes learnings relevant and authentic, and it allows opportunities for learners to take responsibility of their own learning. So to explain that a little bit further, what contextualized teaching and learning does is it brings learners past experiences plus a curriculum from a textbook, and then it leads to the student goals, like these long-term goals that our students have. So maybe your student wants to get a job with higher wages, maybe they want to go to college, maybe they want to they want to pass a high school equivalency exam, or maybe they want to help their children with their schoolwork. Whatever the goals are, the skills and knowledge gap that's identified here, contextualized teaching and learning fills that gap. I think somebody said in their response, it meets learners where they are, and that's exactly how it's defined. If you Google contextualized teaching and learning, that's what pops up. And it means that in order to create a successful lesson plan, we need to include our learners' past experiences as well as their future aspirations. Oops. So talking about contextualized instruction, I wanted to just show what traditional instruction versus contextualized instruction looks like. I don't want anyone to think that traditional instruction is wrong or bad or anything like that. This is basically just showing the difference between traditional and contextualized. So when we talk about traditional instruction, it's what most textbooks ask us to teach or are showing us the methods to teach. It uses conventional learning methodologies with little to no accommodation of students' interests and needs. So if you're following a textbook, it's basically every unit, like I'm thinking of ventures. So you go through, I think, community engagement, health section, and like all of these different, which should be relevant, but it's not super specific to our students' needs. When we talk about contextualized instruction, this occurs through a variety of methodologies that target students' goals and interests. And it also provides students with an equitable range of learning experiences. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further. Before we move on to the next slide, does anybody have any questions about contextualized instruction and the definition of contextualized instruction? Okay. So talking about traditional instruction, it embodies a linear approach to teaching. First, we introduce the skills, or we might introduce the content first, but most of the time we're introducing the skills that we are intending to teach. And then we're introducing the content of the lesson plan. and this is linear. So this first is skills, second is content. And research has shown that this approach is not as effective as an integrated approach, which we're gonna discuss in the next slide. So here's what integrated instruction looks like. Student engagement increases when they're taught why they are learning the concepts and how those concepts are used in real world contexts. And one way to ensure that your lesson plans are contextualized is through integration. So instead of teaching skills or content first and then teaching content or skills second, we're doing it at the same time. So we're teaching the skills and the content at the same time. And again, that's called integrated instruction. And that's a part of contextualized teaching and learning. I'm going to show you how to do that. So in order to teach contextually, you want to choose a standard and a content area first. And then when you look at your standard that you've chosen, we're going to identify the skills or the action verbs within the standard. And then you could start brainstorming some student-centered contextualized activities that teach the skills. When I say student-centered, what do you think I mean by that?
Hi, this is Pat. I would say that means it's something that is directly related to their goals and interests. So instead of it being a very general content, that you could target it towards their goals, whether it's a job or a skill.
Absolutely. Pat, that's a really good way to explain it. And we have another answer in the chat. Let me see what that is. Teaching the skills and content is integration. Yes. So as Pat explained, it's, you're based on this, you're basing what you're teaching on the students' interests and goals. Also, student-centered means that, yes, Robert just said it, interactive for the students, opportunities for practice, not just listening. That's it. So as the instructor, I'm not going to talk at my students the whole entire time. I'm going to make opportunities for the students to work together, for the students to read things aloud, to participate with their peers, that kind of thing. Really having the students take the lead on their own instruction. So here's some additional questions that you want to think about, and this will kind of help you take the student-centered, contextualized, integrated approach to your planning activities. So first, who determined the content of the lesson? Did you look at your textbook? Did you say, this looks like a good thing to teach? Why did you choose that? Did you not have a lot of time? We've all been guilty of that. Like, we don't have a ton of time to plan our lessons. We pick something really quickly, and that's totally fine. But think about it, who determined the content of this lesson? Did I consider my students when I chose the content? How are the skills being taught? Are we teaching the skills first and then talking about the content? Or are we talking about the content and the skills at the same time? How do students know what the expected outcomes of the lesson are? So do our students know what we're asking them to do? Did we tell them the objectives at the beginning of the lesson? Or are we just, showing them the lesson and not really explaining what the lesson's about beforehand? How will you know that the students are accomplishing the skills and content knowledge? So based on the activities, is there opportunities for students to showcase what they're learning? And is there, some kind of comprehension check, basically? How are most activities completed? And this, I know that some of you might work one-on-one with your students, and that's totally, totally fine. But when you're a classroom mate, or if you're working with a group of students, are you allowing students to work individually in pairs or in small groups, or are you only doing whole class activities? And then finally, how do the skills and content link to learners' goals and interests? So here's a situation, and we're just going to read through it. We're going to read it, and then we're going to talk about strategies that we can use to improve this. So I'm using the textbook to determine each lesson's content and skills. So why is this situation a concern based on what we just discussed?
This is Robert. This feels like you're kind of following along to the textbook and not necessarily taking into consideration the student's level and their learning needs and goals. So if the student, wants to be a nurse, then you would take nursing content. And if their skills are, I don't know, maybe if they're trying to develop their English language skills to become a nurse, then you would take that into consideration as well. And then you would go into the textbook to find content that is aligned with that.
Thank you so much. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much. That's exactly right. So we didn't take the students into consideration. We just used, it sounds like the person who did this is just using the textbook and not taking the students' interests, their goals into consideration. How about the second question? And this is anybody, this doesn't have to be Robert. What instructional strategies can we implement to improve this?
Chelsea, Kia said in the chat, taking time to go over the textbooks helps with instructional strategies.
Yes. So when you say taking time to go over the textbooks, are you doing that as just the teacher, or are you going over the textbook with the student? Sorry, Kia, I'm putting you on the spot here. So Christine actually added to this, find out which parts of the text your student is interested in covering. So yes, that kind of answered the question as well for Kia. So we do want to, utilize the student's interests. We want to incorporate the students into their own learning. So I do recommend, instead of going over the textbook by yourself as the teacher, bring your students in and say, like, let's go through this text and see like what stands out to you and what interests you. Just like Christine explained, find out what parts of that textbook interest them, what meets their goals, that kind of thing. I think that's really important. Also, there might be things that you as the teacher feel your students need. That's totally fine too. If your students don't necessarily pick it out on their own, but you think that it's important for them to focus on it, that's totally fine. You can absolutely focus on those as well. You don't need this slide because everybody pretty much answered this correctly. So we want to allow the student to choose the content by considering their goals and interests, just like Robert and Christine explained. And we're considering skills within certain standards that you haven't recently addressed. So we're going to talk about the standards. And I understand that not everybody might use the college and career readiness standards in their lesson planning. That's understandable. We're going to walk through it pretty slowly. So I don't want you to fret if you've never used these in your class before. These are the college and career readiness standards for adult education. This is what we utilize when we plan our lessons, and it's pretty hefty. These standards they're very large. I'm going to say that. If you're not familiar with them, in the next couple of activities, we're going to pick out just specific standards, and I'm going to show you how to actually find those action action verbs to utilize in your lesson planning or your activity planning process. I am going to copy these into the chat though, in case anybody is interested in looking at them more. Like I said, they are pretty extensive, but there are plenty of additional trainings around the college and career readiness standards if you're interested in learning more about them in the PD portal. So first, here's an example. Here's an example of a student that I'm working with. So the content area that I want to focus on generally, civics education, and the skills within the standard that I've chosen. So I'm choosing CCR Reading Anchor 2, which is determine central ideas or themes of a text and analyze their development, summarize the key supporting details and ideas. All I did here was look at the standard and choose those action words: determine, analyze, summarize. And then based on that, I'm going to create an activity that aligns the content and the skills chosen from the standard. So take a guess. Let's try this together. How do you think the teacher could teach the content, so the civics, and the skills to their students? Feel free to type it in the chat too if you don't want to say it aloud. All right, Rachel helped y'all out on this one. So have the student read a short article about a local election and find the central idea and summarize it. So yes, Rachel used actual action verbs from the standard, and then she chose a more specific topic area. So, oh, we have another answer too. So the content area that we chose is civics, and then Rachel said the local election. And that's really specific, and that's relevant to our learners, right? Because it's relevant to everybody, the local election. And what we're asking them to do is find the central idea, summarize it. So we have another response from Kia: determine, analyze, summarize the context to students. And then Christina said, look at the reading passage and train students to begin to ask the questions who, what, when, where, why, how. And these can help students begin to identify central ideas and themes. Yes, so we're asking those WH questions. And I think, Christine, I think that's actually in the levels of the standard. So that's really good, using the levels within the standard. I won't get into that yet, but yeah, these are asking specific questions about the text that helps the students identify central ideas and themes. Anyone else? One thing I want to add to Christina's response is looking at a reading passage that's relevant to this content area, to civics. So, we could say looking at a reading passage about, somebody who's running in the local election and train students. So we want to make sure that we're integrating that content into teaching the skills as well. So here's just a brief example of an activity that you might do. So have the students complete a story web graphic or organizer after reading a text about voters' rights. So we have these graphic, I love graphic organizers. I don't know if y'all have ever used them before, but just having the students, the first thing is, finding the main idea and then the supporting ideas, that kind of thing. You could have, and that does, like Kia said, that does teach the students to summarize using graphic organizers. And Christine said, I am using the American Spirit magazine from the Daughters of the American Revolution for the reading passages about national parks. Perfect. So we're going to continue to do this. We're going to consider the content and skills that are in the prompts. We were going to do this in breakout activities, but I think doing it together is going to be more beneficial. So we're going to look at the prompt on the screen. We're going to look at the suggested audience as well. And then together we're going to brainstorm ideas for how to integrate content and skills in an activity or a task or a strategy. Challenge yourselves here. Don't be afraid to give answers, because even if it's not fully correct, we're going to work together to make sure that we're getting both those skills and the content areas together. So here's the second one. So our audience is an HSD or high school equivalency class or student. You could just be working with one high school equivalency student. The content area is health. So we have this very general content area. Let's get more specific in our lesson. The skills that we're focusing on is the CCR Reading Anchor 1, which is read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and make logical inferences from it. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support conclusions drawn from the text. So again, this is pretty general, reading closely, making inferences, and we're citing evidence from the text. So how would you integrate the content and skills in an activity? What might an activity look like? Okay, so we have read a medical report. Sounds good. And after they read the medical report, how do we have them make inferences or cite specific textual evidence? Maybe see if they could summarize what a report says. Yes, that's a good way. So our goal, we have them reading the medical report. How do we know that they're understanding what's in that medical report? And we can have them summarizing what that says. Do we want to make them do it or have them do it orally, or do we want to have them do it through writing? I don't know. I mean, maybe your student needs help with writing, and then we could, incorporate some writing strategies in there. Or maybe they need some help with their speaking skills, so we could have them do it orally. So we have
I like the,
oh, go ahead.
Chelsea, I was just going to say, I like the medical report idea, because sometimes the things you get from the doctor are really hard to read. And it might be interesting to say, like, based on this report, would you say there's a serious problem or something? And then they could cite evidence to either support that or not. We're hoping not, but
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I think that's a great example, or it's a great way to challenge readers or to challenge the students to see if they're understanding what they're reading. I feel like a medical report, you're right, I would have a difficult time reading that as well, but sometimes you have to do it. And Anne says also helping them in their lives if they should go to the doctor, but when they go to the doctor. Robert says example texts, flu versus common cold, and someone's account of their symptoms. An activity, make inferences about the speaker's illness by citing evidence. Do they have the flu or the common cold? So that's great. Thank you, Robert. That's perfect. Christine, what is 2 and the other slide? Did you mean the previous slide, Christine? Maybe I'll answer that question afterwards, but okay. So then we have Kia, teach the student to explain content, explain evidence by citing the readings. Yes, I think something that Rachel and Robert have explained is asking questions, asking relevant questions. So I don't know if anyone's ever used a resource where they have comprehension questions after reading a text. They ask pretty specific questions, which ask the readers to go back to the text itself and find evidence in the readings. So just an example that I gave here. So have the students read a text about how video games help mental health and answer text-dependent questions after reading. Ask the students to go back to the text. This is just like an extra step that I have my learners do. They go back to the text and they highlight where they got their answers. So that's the evidence right there. They're just going back and they're just using a highlighter. They could underline whatever, but they're going back to the text itself and they're showing, here's where I got that answer from. And Christine says, my student enjoys answering the text-dependent questions. For sure, yes, absolutely. I think that it really helps, especially when they're able to go back and they're able to show you where they got that answer from. It's validating. This is where I got this answer from. That's how I know it's correct. So Christine, thank you for mentioning that. All right, let's try another one. So our audience here is ESL Intermediate. The content is community engagement. And we're going to go with the CCRS Writing Anchor 6, which is use technology, including the internet, to produce and publish writing and to interact and collaborate with others. So we have produce and publish writing, interact and collaborating with others. Remember, this is writing. So the skill that we're focusing on here is writing. We're asking students to interact. We're asking them to produce writing and we're asking them to publish something. So what do you think? How do we create an activity that embodies community engagement with writing skills? Okay, so we have Katie says, have students work together to write a blog post about opportunities to be involved in their local neighborhood. Maybe choose a specific event like the neighborhood cleanup. Yes, a blog post is perfect. That's how they're interacting with each other. They're using those writing skills. Doesn't have to be super formal. It could be informal. It could be just, like a journal entry, that kind of thing. But they're using those skills to interact, collaborate, produce, and publish by participating in the blog post. And then we're integrating the content around community engagement, specifically about an event that's happening that maybe they participated in. Write a letter to a local representative. Yes, absolutely. develop a lesson plan where students can write about the reading and topic. Yep. And then Christina says students can look at a proposal for something local, a new bridge, a bike lane, etc. Come up with an opinion about on the topic as a group, work together to write a letter or a blog post about the topic. Yes, absolutely. So you're doing it. You're incorporating those skills and the content area in your activities here. Anyone else? So my example here was basically, I like your ideas better, to be completely honest. So students will respond to a discussion forum prompt that asks, what type of volunteer work have you done or would you be interested in doing? And then students can respond to at least one peer. So that's something that, the blog posts, you could have them ensure that they're responding to each other for that collaboration as well. But if they're working together to create these posts, that's the collaboration component. Okay, so the next one, this is a citizenship class. So the content is civics or social studies, and we're going to do more writing here. We're planning, revising, editing, rewriting, or trying a new approach. And we want them to develop or strengthen their writing skills. So what do you think? What is a activity that you might do to incorporate the content and the skills here? I'd love to hear from somebody I haven't heard from yet. Okay, so we have facilitate a writing group lesson where students can learn with their peers. Yes, and I think he had like, how do we get more specific around that? Like, how would the students learn with their peers? What are we going to ask them to do? So if we're asking students to plan, revise, edit, rewrite, trying a new approach, Kia mentioned, we're going to have them work with their peers. You could maybe develop some sort of rubric or some like reflection questions, that kind of thing. Maybe Rachel wrote something and then Rachel gives it to me to proofread or edit or something, and I provide some feedback. So that's called peer editing or peer reviewing, and that's a really good approach to focus on this skill. How about the content area? What's a content area that we might focus on? Yes, Christine, shared writing activity. What kind of content area what are they writing about? Petition for a community dog park. Yes, absolutely. The 3 branches of government. Yes. Maybe have them watch the most recent, finding the Speaker of the House and have them write about that. Okay, Mona, ask them to write about their favorite holiday and then students share. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't quite focus on this content, but that's okay. Maybe maybe, tis the season, we're in the holiday season. So this is something that's really interesting, having the students write about their favorite holiday and then share with each other. I think that's great. Also incorporating that peer strategy, something where the students can give each other feedback, or that allows us to, make those revisions, make the editing, to ensure that we're encompassing the writing anchor here. Assuming this is HSE related, anything that may show up on the GED high set: civil rights, depression, branches of government. Yep, those are good. Those are good content areas. And we're also assuming that they have a reading to respond to or have been learning about this topic. Yes, that's good. That's good, because you do have to assume with this for sure. But let's assume that for sure. And Rachel says each student could write about one step in how a bill becomes a law, and then they could work together in a group to put them all together. I like that, Rachel. Okay. So this is the example that I provided. So students will participate in a peer review where they share their written assignments with the peer and make edits based on peers' feedback. And something that I just realized I didn't do was incorporate the content in this example. So I'm going to go with Robert's petition for a dog park, because I would love a dog park in my community. And I think Robert would too for Bow. So that's what we're going to go with.
Kia also mentioned voting for a student government, which would definitely become important for the students in class.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I know that this was just a very brief overview about going through contextualized teaching and learning. We have some time, and I know that I didn't answer a question that Christine had asked earlier. So I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, clarifying questions before we end. And Christine, if you want to just clarify what you were asking earlier, I'd be happy to respond.
Chelsea, I just want to say, because I've worked with volunteers a lot before, that sometimes it's a little scary to get away from the textbook. And one thing that I have seen that has sort of helped is, if you find an exercise in a textbook that teaches the skill you want, but it isn't the context that's relevant for your student, you can often just sort of swap out the reading or change, the topic of what you're talking about, and use the same exercise. So the same type of questions or the same prompts. And that, that's sort of like a way that you can start making a step to being a little more contextualized.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that textbooks, they're fine. They're user friendly, and how it was explained earlier by Kia, and I forget who else mentioned it. You can involve the students in choosing their own content areas and the skills that they want to focus on through those textbooks. You don't have to just shy away from the textbooks, but there are so many other resources that you can utilize to help with the content to make it more relevant. I don't know if anybody's heard of Newsella. This is it's a good resource. It's free. I think it's free. But it's mostly about current events. And I know that we talked about social studies and civics a lot today. So Newsella has different levels of reading as well. So if you have lower level learners, if you're working with higher level learners, it's the same reading, but you can modify it so that it meets the need of your learners. You can also download Newsella articles, and you can actually type in it and change things. If you feel like some vocabulary or language is too advanced for your learners, you can change it. But that's a really good resource to use if you feel like the skills in your textbook are relevant, but the content's not. You can use that as a resource as well. I don't know if anybody else has any other online resources that they've used. Free would be ideal. But yeah, if you have anything else, feel free to share it in the chat. Common Lit, yes, Common Lit's a good one. And ReadWorks, I was gonna say ReadWorks, Christina. Robin says news for you. I remember news for you. Any similar content resources for math? I will admit, Sue, that math is not my strong suit. I'm going to ask Rachel if Rachel knows anything.
So contextualizing math is a little bit, it's just a little bit different because you might be, for example, looking at what the student's goal is. So maybe they're going into nursing, or maybe they're going into construction, and thinking about the types of math that they need to learn for that. And then you can do things like changing the context of a word problem to match what they're doing. There's nothing.
You could actually, that's a really good point, Rachel. Like I'm envisioning like a word problem or something, and actually having students measure, like utilize like a tool that they might be using from a word problem.
Yeah. I think the key with math is the key with math, it's still like starting with what a student already knows. So one thing that I often do is I will like take a problem and I'll really simplify it down and say like, okay, if you had to figure this out in your head, what would you do? And then sort of build on the processes. But it's quite different than the social studies and reading and writing examples here. Maybe we'll have to have Maribel come in and do something on contextualizing math.
Yes, I think that opens up a door for that. Or
Christina,
Jonathan too could.
Christina looks like she has some ideas.
I'm looking. There's a website that I came across recently that was better at it, but of course I can't find it on my in my very long list of websites that I give to tutors. But if I do come across it, it's not one that I've used super often, and it's definitely for like kind of lower level skills building. If we stumble upon it, I will share it with you, Rachel.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. Another thing for math is just to make sure that your textbook isn't all just drill. Anything with word problems makes it easier for you to contextualize it. But yeah, volunteers aren't often the ones choosing the textbook, so that's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, thanks for these questions. They're good questions. I'll hang on for a little bit here, but I'm letting you all go 5 minutes early. If you have any questions you don't think of right now, but you want to learn more about contextualized teaching and learning, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk about this. I really like contextualized instruction. And then also, we ask that you complete the survey. If there's anything that you wish that we talked about today that we didn't, let us know in the survey. But thank you for participating today. And like I said, I'll stick around for a couple minutes if you want to hang out and ask anything.
Chelsea, this is Sue.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, thanks so much for today. When you were talking about, you know, reading text and asking them the central ideas and things like that, or evidence, what's a gentle way, or if they're totally off base or they can't find it, or, you know what I mean? If they're,
Yeah.
how do you direct them to a better, or do you ask, is there a better, not better, that wouldn't be it. Is there
Okay.
another, or, you know what I mean? Just to help me guide how you would guide a student if they're not quite getting it.
So if we're looking at like a paragraph with our student and we want them to find that central idea in the paragraph, is that what you're asking me? And then
Correct,
they can't.
and they're not quite hitting the mark.
Yeah, no, I totally, I get that. So what you can do is, you could just model it. So do it yourself, kind of show them why that's the central idea. So highlight the central idea. I really like looking back at the text and actually getting in there, highlighting it yourself. And then you can circle some supporting ideas and maybe look at language that makes things supporting rather than, that central idea. Sometimes it's as explicit as today we're going to talk about, and then like it'll explain, and that'll be like the central idea of that paragraph. I can also send over some like a graphic organizer that I've used in the past too, if that's helpful. But
That would be great, because when you did mention the graphic organizers, and I'm not familiar with those.
oh yeah,
I'll be tutoring GED preparation, and this will be I've done naturalization. So this will be a whole new experience for me. So any resource like that would be great.
yes, for sure. So this is my email address, Sue. If you want to just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you and I'll send you a couple of resources.
Thank you. And these are graphic, or you call them?
Graphic organizers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another thing, if you're moving into high school equivalency, is that the readings are often a little longer. So it can help to break them into sections. And then you could do it like Chelsea said, and model with one section and then have the student practice.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, have a great rest of your day.